Ay, qué bonito es volar a las 2 de la mañana, a las 2 de la mañana. Ay, qué bonito es volar, ay, mamá. It's a song called La Bruja, the Witch. It's an old Mexican tune. And this story comes from about 200 years ago, from old California. The old days here in the town of San Diego de Alcalá. Long before the Yankees ever got here, when it was only Californios and Kumeyaay native people living here. And back in those days, there was a lot of talk about witches. Volar y dejarse caer en los brazos de una dama y en los brazos de una dama. Ay, qué bonito es volar, ay, mamá. Back in those days, a lot of people talked about dark magic, witchcraft, sorcerers, warlocks here in San Diego. But the most powerful and the most wicked of all those sorcerers was a man named Ludovico. Me agarra la bruja, me lleva a su casa, me vuelve maceta y una calabaza. Me agarra la bruja, me lleva al cuartel, me sienta en su mesa, me da de comer. Y dígame, dígame, dígame usted, ¿cuántas criaturitas se ha chupado usted? Ninguna, ninguna, ninguna no ve. Yo ando en pretensiones de chuparle a usted. Ludovico, he was the most powerful sorcerer in all of San Diego. So Ludovico, one year he called for a witch's Sabbath to be held at El Campo Santo. At the old cemetery. You can go visit El Campo Santo. It's in Old Town, what we now call Old Town. Back then it was pretty new. A lot of fresh graves in there. So all the witches and warlocks and sorcerers, they were going to hold a witch's Sabbath. And they knew that Ludovico was going to be there. So everyone had to be there. He was a man with power. Everyone wanted to see that power. And a few of those brujos, a few of those witches and warlocks, they thought maybe if they could outdo Ludovico, maybe they could take his place as the most powerful in San Diego. Now Ludovico, his life started in an unusual way. They say that he was conceived during a lightning storm underneath a barren olive tree. His mother, she was seduced by a strange man. This caballero came to town all dressed in black on a black horse. Nobody had ever seen him before. He seduced her and then he left her with the child and with the shame. Nobody knew who that man was, and some folks said that he was the devil himself. Now Ludovico, he was born on the day of a full eclipse. It looked like night outside. Born during a full eclipse, he had to call that film covering up his face when he was born. And they say that Ludovico, on the third day that he was alive, he cut his first tooth. And they say that by the time he was 1 year old, he was speaking in complete sentences. Some folks say that Ludovico, by the time he was 3, he had a full-grown mustache. Some folks say, I don't know. But Ludovico, he had power. There were a lot of people who said that they had power. They really didn't. A lot of people claimed to be able to give you amulets that would bring you good fortune. A lot of them, they were really charlatanes. Charlatan, that's a Spanish word for someone who's full of it. A lot of these charlatanes, they would sell you a silver coin. They'd sell it for the cost of 10 silver coins. And they would carve a symbol on that silver coin to bring you fortune. So if you had trouble riding your horse, they would carve a saddle on that silver coin and it would help you. If you had trouble with money, they would carve a picture of a treasure chest on that coin. If you had trouble in the bedroom, they would carve, well, you get the idea. And they claimed that it would help you. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But when Ludovico, when he gave you one of those amulets, it always worked. He had real power. So Ludovico, he called for the witches' Sabbath. It was going to be on April 30th, the most holy night for the witches. You might know it as Walpurgis night, the night of Saint Walpurgis, Santa Walpurga. So he called for this Sabbath to all come together in El Campo Santo. It was going to be a night with no rules, no limits, nothing is sacred. These people, they were just rebelling against everything. And you know, the old California society, it was a really conservative society. really uptight. Everyone, you had to go to mass every Sunday. You had to be married by the time you were 20. Women had to wear the frills up to here and cover up the ankles and the whole deal. And everyone had to just be really puritanical. So, you know, when people live in a culture like that, sometimes some of them decide to rebel against that. And then when you rebel, you go too far in the other direction. So all the witches and warlocks, they gathered together in the Campo Santo. They got together at midnight. And they were going to rebel against everything. Take off everything. It started by taking off all their clothes. They took off their clothes. They all got naked. They rubbed their bodies down with chicken's blood mixed with the soot from the chimneys. They rubbed themselves from head to foot. There's no rules, no limits, nothing. It's sacred, they all said. And then they all started just singing all these different tunes that they had lyrics that were too obscene for me to repeat here with you good folks, but it kind of sounded a little bit like, Ay, qué bonito es volar a las 12 de la mañana, a las 12 de la mañana. Ay, qué bonito es volar, ay, mamá. They sang these bawdy tunes and they held a full-on black mass before they were going to conjure and show their powers. They would hold a black mass. Before that, they all ate the raw livers of black cats that had been killed with a silver dagger. There's no limits, there's no rules, nothing is sacred. And then they held that dark black mass. You know how you do a black mass? You do the Holy Catholic Mass, but you do it in reverse. You do everything backwards. Horrifying. They started off by saying the Lord's Prayer backwards. Can you imagine? Do you know what that sounds like? Would you like to see what that sounds like?
Yes.
It might be dangerous. It might even be blasphemous, but I will show you the Lord's Prayer backwards if you're ready for it.
Careful,
All right.
David.
Our Father, just horrifying. Rebelling against everything. These people, they had their pants sagging, they had their hats on backwards, toothpicks in their mouth, just rebelling against everything. Nothing is sacred, they said. They finished that black mass, and then it was time for all of them to start conjuring. So one warlock, he stood and he said some strange words. He made some spectral lights appear in the night sky. They danced about. That was pretty amazing. And one witch, she conjured up some demonic voices, and all those voices, you could hear them moaning and groaning, all from outside the walls of El Campo Santo, because of course it's holy, blessed ground where the people are buried. And all those witches and warlocks, they stood among the crosses and the tombstones. They could hear those evil voices just held back by that adobe wall. That was pretty amazing. Other witches, they came and they conjured up objects out of thin air. One warlock, he saw a stray dog walking by. He cursed that dog and he turned it into a werewolf. That dog, it took on human features, hideous. And all the witches and warlocks, they just mocked it and they pointed. That poor, pitiful creature just kind of slunk off into the shadows. No rules, no limits, nothing is sacred. Well, eventually, after enough of those conjurings, by the time it was about 2 in the morning, all the witches and warlocks, they said, Que pase Ludovico, ya, que pase una vez. Let's have Ludovico come. Everyone just stood back and Ludovico stood in the center. Ludovico, and he said, I want to invite all of you to come with me outside of the holy ground, outside of the walls, out there where all the unbaptized people are buried. Because for this dark magic, we need to leave this holy ground. So they knew it was going to be good. So they all walked out of that adobe wall, out there to where all those unbaptized people are still buried to this day. You can go and you can see where those people are buried. You can park on top of someone's grave down there. So they went out of those cemetery walls. And Ludovico, he pulled out his flautín, his little flute. He started to play this sad, lonesome song. Ay, qué bonito es volar a las 12 de la mañana. He was playing that song on his flute. And then people started to kind of shout and react as the ground had started trembling and the ground was cracking open all around them. Somebody screamed when they saw a spectral hand, a skeleton's hand, reach up out of the ground, followed by an arm, followed by a whole skeleton that crawled and pulled its way out of the ground. Then another skeleton pulled itself out too. 3, 4, 5 more skeletons all around them were crawling out of that earth. Some of the people who'd been buried there for a long time, you know, it took a while for the bones to find each other and come together, but they did. Eventually, all those skeletons are just standing around. And then Ludovico, he picked up the pace of that song, and he started playing that song a lot faster and a lot happier. Y ahora sí, maldita bruja, ya te chupaste a mi hijo, ya te chupaste a mi hijo. Ahora sí, maldita bruja y mamá, y ahora le vas a chupar a tu marido el ombligo, a tu marido el ombligo. Ahora sí, maldita bruja y mamá. And as he sang those skeletons, they started to dance. And they've danced this horrible, hideous, cruel parody of human movement. All the skeletons were dancing around, and Ludovico, he smiled and he laughed and he mocked the skeletons. He said, "Órale, cabrones! Bailen bien, pendejos!" He mocked them, he cursed them. And as he did, he pointed and he laughed. And Ludovico, he was the only one laughing. Nobody else was laughing. Nobody else was having a good time anymore, because all of those witches and warlocks, they recognized those skeletons. One of the warlocks, he realized that was his brother who'd never been baptized. He recognized the grave he'd come out of. Someone else, he knew that was his sister. She died of consumption. Someone else recognized his dead wife, his father, his mother. Every one of those witches and warlocks had a loved one who was buried outside of the holy ground, buried with those unbaptized people. After Ludovico finished his song, those skeletons crawled back into their resting place. That was the end of the fun. He had crossed a line somehow. It really sobered everybody up. They just kind of put their clothes back on, sort of ashamed. They all trudged on back home to their beds. It ruined the party for them. But it taught them a valuable lesson. And some people after that, they said, maybe Ludovico, maybe he wasn't so wicked as everyone said. And maybe he was a lot wiser than people said, because he had taught those witches and warlocks that night that whole claim, nothing is sacred, it's not really true. Some things truly are sacred, even for witches and warlocks. Y ahora sí, maldita bruja, ya te chupaste a mi hijo. Ahora le vas a chupar a tu marido el ombligo, y a tu marido el ombligo. Ahora sí, maldita bruja y mamá. The dance of the skeletons.